come to my last subsection in the closure of this lecture, the new democracy, security agendas, and unconventional counterinsurgency. First point, the democratic credentials of the armed forces. What I previously discussed were the leftovers of military rule. But it is also clear that important paradigm change took place with respect to Latin America's security agendas. The Cold War is over. Cuba and the United States normalized their relations. In Colombia, the government and the FARC made peace. In the entire region, the Latin American military operate under command of legal and legitimate governments and do not develop other agendas than those prescribed or solicited by national governments. Chilean and civilian governments have a clear stake in redefining the formal missions of the armed forces, and a new generation of officers lines up toward prestigious occupations, modern equipment, and limited budgets. But then I come to my second point, internal security risks. But I also explicitly mention that many American governments formally established internal security missions for their armed forces in Bolivia, Colombia, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Mexico, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. In present-day Colombia, Central America, Mexico, confronted with highly violent organized crime and drug cartels, both presidential decrees and parliamentarian legislation assigned the armed forces the mission to assist the police or even to display the leading role in handling the internal security, given a clear and present threat by drug cartels and crime syndicates. This is a consequence of the so-called, what many researchers and analysts call the new violence in Latin America. And it is explained very shortly in the following sentences. Redemocratization in Latin America coincided with a prolonged economic crisis, and recently in the 21st century, Latin America recovered from the shock. Meanwhile, the process of mass poverty was consolidated, strongly affecting the urban middle and labor classes. Its consequences became manifest in a class transformation that impoverished urban inhabitants, and the steadily in-streaming urban migrant segments became informalized, that is to say, seeking employment in low-quality jobs, making a living in slum cities in the metropolitan and urban periphery, unprotected and subjected to violence by what is called euphemistically non-state actors, and frequently also by the representative of law and order. New, predominantly urban violence actors emerged: gangs, urban vigilantes, organized crimes, lynching parties, private security companies, and violent law enforcement agencies form the scenery of day-to-day violence, insecurity, and fear. Gangs, drug factions, and vigilantes antagonize each other for the control over urban mini-territories or commercial drug routes in the more urban areas. The presence of all those new violence perpetrators produced an expansion of violence by non-state and state actors that in some countries already caused much more victims than in the large decades of civil wars. I have two other points and then I'm finishing. The first one is the war on drugs. Compared with Colombia, the two other cocaine-producing countries, Bolivia and Peru, where coca producers are not immediately considered as the ultimate state enemies, are much less homicidal. Extreme drug-related violence is directly linked to the two Latin American countries that declared a war on drugs, Colombia and Mexico. Brute force, however, is also common in the countries that form the corridor between Colombian and Mexican cartels and gangs, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. In these 5 countries, organized drug crime is the major cause of murder, fear, and political corruption. This common knowledge that drug-derived corruption money pervades in the institutional fabric of societies at most levels. The use of violence and intimidation induce or paralyze action of civil servants and law enforcement agencies, officers in a way that suits the interests of the violence perpetrators. The Northern Triangle of Central America, that's Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, is probably the most affected region in terms of violence, weakened public institutions, and infiltration in the economy, society, and even in this political system by organized crime. As in Mexico, criminal groups, as well as youth gangs, use brute force and violence as an operational culture. Like in Mexico, the cartels use carrot and stick tactics to dominate or to infiltrate. When confronted by resistance, extreme violence is used. Of course, they use enforcers against enemies and adversaries, and of course, they murder local police officers. But in general, they attempt systematically to bribe the local police and the local public sector officers to accommodate the power structures of local power brokers and majors, and to infiltrate as benefactors local and regional social movements. My last point, the zero tolerance and American pressure. Democratically elected civilian government identified violence and crime as a new security threat. It is the result of two sources of political pressure. The first one is domestic. Important and very important constituencies favor zero tolerance policies, mano dura in Spanish, to repress crime and impose order. This discourse taps into a widespread moral panic of insecurity and fear that has taken hold of large segments of the Latin American electorate. The second source is international. The focus of induction of production and trade of narcotics in source and transit countries as the key strategy of the American war of drugs. This has contributed to a permanent intertwining of American anti-drug agencies and national police and military forces, especially in the ending countries, Central America and Mexico. And it also implied an increasing militaristic approach of the drug program. Combating drugs and the private organizations characterized as organized crime and terrorists is strongly supported by the United States, since long the largest assistance provider in security matters in the region. About the positive results, exists serious concern, and I quote now only American analysts and historians who only perceive minimal effects and the blurring between internal security and national defense. Internally, the emphasis on the war of drugs and the zero tolerance policies produce also a by-effect, the persecution and mass effects of small-scale offenders. Petty criminals acting as retailers on the domestic markets, in the slums, indigenous and black young male adults, easily to detain and easily to be sent to prisons. Gradually, the detention centers in both the Americas, north and south of the Rio Grande, are disproportionately populated by the poor and the underprivileged. Reluctantly or not, and I'll come back to the armed institution, reluctantly or not, by the absence of external warfare, Latin American armed forces have assumed a multiplicity of internal security missions. As provider of internal security, as parallel police force, as principal actor of warfare against terrorists and organized crime, as pacifier in the slum wars like in Medellin or in Rio de Janeiro. And additionally, one can observe the reciprocal process, the militarization of police with special forces trained in urban warfare and armed with heavy weaponry. However, my final conclusion is that all those new missions are requested and explicitly permitted by democratically elected government and are based on legal charters. There is a fundamental difference in comparison with the difference with the decades of military dictatorship. The classical political armies of Latin America are now relegated to history. The key missions and characteristics of the military professions are now being defined by elected government. Thank you very much.